Chapter 1. It was a typical Monday morning, and Jane was on her way to work. She was feeling good about the day ahead of her. She had a big project to finish, and she was excited to get started. However, as she walked through the door of her office, her mood quickly changed. She could feel the tension in the air. Her colleagues were whispering, and she could hear snippets of their conversation. Jane knew something was wrong, but she wasn't sure what. As she made her way to her desk, she noticed that her boss, Mr. Johnson, was glaring at her. Jane tried to ignore it and get on with her work, but it was difficult. She could feel his eyes on her, and it made her feel uncomfortable. She tried to focus on her work, but she kept making mistakes. Finally, she decided to take a break and get some coffee. As she was pouring her coffee, her colleague, Sarah, approached her. Sarah looked worried and asked if Jane had heard about the meeting that was scheduled for later that day. Jane hadn't heard anything about a meeting, so Sarah told her that Mr. Johnson was going to be addressing the team about some issues that had been raised. Jane felt a knot forming in her stomach. She had a feeling that she knew what the meeting was about. She had been working on a project with another colleague, Tom, and they had disagreed on some aspects of the project. Jane had thought that they had resolved the issue, but now she wasn't so sure. Chapter 2. As the morning went on, Jane could feel the tension in the office building. Everyone was on edge, and it was difficult to concentrate on work. Finally, it was time for the meeting. Jane and her colleagues made their way to the conference room, and Mr. Johnson began to speak. He started by saying that there had been some concerns raised about the quality of work that was being produced by the team. Jane knew what was coming next. Mr. Johnson singled out Jane and Tom and accused them of not working together effectively. He said that their work was subpar, and that they needed to improve their communication. Jane was shocked. She had no idea that Mr. Johnson felt this way. She had thought that they had resolved the issue, but now she realized that Tom must have complained to Mr. Johnson behind her back. She felt betrayed and angry. Chapter 3. Over the next few weeks, Jane noticed a change in the way that her colleagues were treating her. They were cold and distant, and she could tell that they had taken Mr. Johnson's side. She tried to ignore it and focus on her work, but it was difficult. She felt like she was constantly being watched, and she was afraid to make any mistakes. One day, as she was leaving work, she overheard some of her colleagues talking about her. They were saying that she was incompetent and that she didn't belong on the team. Jane felt like crying. She couldn't believe that they were talking about her like this. She had always thought that they were friends. That night, Jane couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the conversation in her head. She knew that she had to do something. She couldn't let them get away with bullying her like this. Chapter 4. The next morning, Jane decided to talk to Mr. Johnson. She knew that it was a risky move, but she felt like she had no other choice. She made an appointment to speak with him, and she spent the rest of the day preparing what she was going to say. When she arrived at Mr. Johnson's office, she was nervous. She took a deep breath and walked in. Mr. Johnson looked up and asked her what she wanted. Jane explained that she felt like she was being bullied by her colleagues. She told him about the conversation that she had overheard, and she explained how she had been feeling over the past few weeks. Mr. Johnson listened to her, but he didn't seem to take her concerns seriously. He told her that she needed to toughen up and that she couldn't let her colleagues get to her. Chapter 5. Jane was disappointed by Mr. Johnson's response. She had hoped that he would be more sympathetic. She knew that she had to do something else to stop the bullying. She decided to talk to the HR department. When she met with the HR representative, she explained the situation. The HR representative listened to her and told her that they would investigate the matter. Jane felt relieved. She knew that she had done the right thing. Over the next few weeks, the HR department interviewed Jane's colleagues and investigated the claims of bullying. When they had finished their investigation, they called Jane in for a meeting. They told her that they had found evidence of bullying and that they were taking steps to address the issue. Chapter 6. Jane was happy to hear that the HR department was taking the issue seriously. She felt like she was finally being heard and that her concerns were being taken seriously. Over the next few weeks, things started to improve. Her colleagues began to treat her with more respect, and she felt like she was part of the team again. However, things didn't go smoothly for long. One day, as she was leaving work, she received a threatening message on her phone. The message was from one of her colleagues, and it was clear that they were still angry with her. Jane felt scared and alone. She didn't know what to do. She knew that she couldn't let her colleagues intimidate her, but she didn't want to make things worse. She decided to talk to the HR department again. Chapter 7. This time, the HR department took immediate action. They called in the colleague who had sent the threatening message and reprimanded him. They also made it clear to the rest of the team that any kind of bullying or harassment would not be tolerated. Over the next few months, things continued to improve. Jane felt like she was finally being accepted by her colleagues again. She had found the courage to stand up to the bullying, and it had paid off. Chapter 8. As time went on, Jane realized that her experience had changed her. She had always been a shy and introverted person, but now she felt more confident and assertive. She knew that she could stand up for herself if she needed to. One day, as she was leaving work, she saw a new employee being bullied by some of her colleagues. She remembered how it felt to be in that situation, and she knew that she couldn't stand by and watch it happen. She walked over to the group and spoke up. She told them that their behavior was unacceptable and that they needed to treat their colleague with respect. To her surprise, the bullies backed down. They seemed surprised that Jane was standing up to them. After that, Jane became known as someone who wouldn't tolerate bullying or harassment. She became a role model for others, and she inspired others to stand up for themselves. Chapter 9. Years went by, and Jane continued to work at the same company. She had been promoted several times, and she was now a manager. She had never forgotten the lessons that she had learned during her experience with workplace bullying. One day, she received an email from a former colleague. The colleague was going through a similar situation, and she didn't know what to do. She had remembered how Jane had stood up to bullying, and she was hoping that Jane could give her some advice. Jane was happy to help. She wrote back to her former colleague and gave her some advice on how to deal with the situation. She felt proud that she could help someone else who was going through what she had gone through. Chapter 10. In the end, Jane realized that standing up to workplace bullying had been one of the most difficult things she had ever done. But she also realized that it had been one of the most important things she had ever done. She had found the courage to stand up for herself, and in doing so, she had inspired others to do the same. She knew that workplace bullying was a serious issue, and that it was something that needed to be addressed. She hoped that by sharing her story, she could help others who were going through similar experiences. She knew that it wasn't easy, but she also knew that it was worth it.